What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the channel. I'm Lotus Arsacore, the one never knows best, bring you another video here today about Grand Blue. I guess Grand Blue's kind of like the focus of the discussion, but it's about just fighting games in general. However, today's video is extra special because I'm joined by a very special guest, none other than Diaphone. Diaphone, say what's up to the people for me.
Hey, what's up, guys? How's it going?
So Diaphone, if you guys aren't familiar with him, is actually a super talented and very skilled and knowledgeable fighting game player who is He's got his hands in multiple different pots. He's very skilled in a multitude of different games, not the least of which being everything that's out right now, like Street Fighter or, you know, Grand Blue, for example. And that's one of the reasons why I want to bring him here on the channel, because I've seen a lot of discussion basically about the, I guess, removal of a point of using technical inputs in Grand Blue. Because as you guys may or may not know, Grand Blue Fantasy Versus is a fighting game that, similar to the likes of, let's say, DNF Duel or even Street Fighter to some degree, has a system of inputs or controls where you can either choose like the more modern, where it's like simplified and you get like one button supers or specials and things like that, or the more technical inputs where you're using, you know, quarter circles and everything of that nature. And lately on Twitter, there's been a big discourse about it, and I kind of have some thoughts and opinions of my own, and I want to get some of the Diaphones as well. And on screen you can kind of see right now that I actually have this the statement that was put up by Fukuhara, the creative director of Grand Blue Fantasy Versus. And actually, before we get into the discussion, you mind if I read this to the people?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so it says, the other day we announced that skills performed using both simple and technical inputs would share the exact same properties in Rising. Reactions came pouring in, and I've been doing my best to read as much of the feedback as possible. From the comments we received, the most common were requests to retain some form of disadvantage for simple inputs and questions regarding why we'd leave the option for technical inputs. I can see where they're coming from, and I'd like to take this opportunity to shine some light on how this decision was made. This is worth noting because basically, if you didn't know, there was an advantage and a disadvantage based on the control type that you chose. If you use technical inputs, like your specials would like regenerate faster, like you could use them more often, whereas if you use the simple inputs, obviously it's easier, it's faster, you can react better, anti better, things like that, you know, one button DP, but the skill recovers slower. And in Versus, they're basically, in Grand Blue, they're removing that to where whether you use simple or technical, it recovers the same. So there's no advantage to using the technical inputs. However, they decided to leave the option to continue doing the technical inputs in the game, despite there being no advantage to that. And his reasoning for that was that, for one, it was apparently a daring game design, but also that I'm not going to read this entire article or the rest of it word for word, although I will leave a link to the tweet in the description down below. You guys can check it out for yourselves. But he feels as though that the execution barrier in fighting games is more of a hurdle that stops players from being able to engage in the actual parts of what makes fighting games fun and interesting, being the neutral, the footsies, and, you know, feeling more so that the combos and accurate inputs are not part of what makes fighting games engaging and fun and allowing everybody to enjoy the genre, which debatable. But with that being said, Diaphone, I'd love for you to go ahead and chime in on this and give some of your thoughts and feelings on this whole discussion, this whole discourse.
Okay, so I'm not gonna lie, I don't even know where to start. I'm pretty opinionated on the topic. I think my overall, like, I say general feel is that I think motion implants aren't necessarily needed in fighting games. I think it's a huge barrier for people trying to learn the game. So if I'm trying to teach a beginner player, having them learn core circle forward inputs takes a really long time, especially to get consistent. And until you're consistent with those inputs, you're basically playing a completely different game. So removing those barriers of entry, I think, is really good. And one of the ways you can remove the barriers of entry is doing what Grand Blue is doing in the past, where you could do the input like simple, or you could do it technical, right? And I thought that was one of the best implementations of this, where it's like there's a reward for doing technical inputs, and you almost always want to do technical inputs, but you know, if you're a beginner, you can do modern. And even for the advanced players, sometimes you actually want to do the easy input, because the extra speed it'll come out as, or the extra consistency it'll come out as, gives a more like strategic benefit to it. So I really liked how Grand Blue was doing before. Now they released a statement, and now they, you know, changed how they're doing it, so there's basically no reason to do technical inputs. I don't like, but at the same time, it's like, it's kind of going, it's weird, because it's like, it's going in the direction I wanted to go in, but at the same time, it was such a cool implementation of like blending both technical and simple inputs that I'm kind of like disappointed that they did it. And the whole statement was like, I don't know, it's like full of corporate buzzwords. Like, I'm like, yeah, what do I even make of this?
I actually have another tweet. So I bookmarked a couple of tweets that I kind of want to bring up and mention throughout this. And one of them is a reply to that statement. It says, is anybody else sick of the corpo Reddit grade buzzwords for his like perfect game to dare and diminish the hurdle, and we made it possible, and et cetera, et cetera. But I definitely share the sentiment in that I thought the system that they originally had was already really good, because I don't mind the idea of, you know, a simple input and a technical input, but I like that you balance it by having, but if you can do the technical inputs, there is a slight advantage to it. Well, I guess slight is, you know, perspective with how much you value it. I thought that the system that they had was really good, so I did find it really interesting, and maybe like ever so slightly, like I don't think this was necessary kind of thing, but I also understand and acknowledge that my bias is a bit skewed to perspective as somebody who is more of an experienced fighting game player, I guess, than the average random casual fan who might pick up a game like this or Street Fighter or whatever for the first time and be like, I can't really do quarter circles. As someone who can do them, it's like, for me, it's no big deal. And like, I'm not perfect with my execution. I drop combos and specials and supers and stuff all the time, but you know, in Grand Blue right now, I'm using all simple inputs. And when I play DNF Duel, I use all simple inputs. I don't even use the technical commands. And like, I can, you know, in like Street Fighter, for example, I don't play modern, I play classic, but it's just like, why not?
Right, exactly. And the thing is with Grand Blue, so for example, like Zoe, there's certain combos you couldn't do if you only use the simple inputs, right? So you were actually forced at a very high level to use the technical inputs, which again, I thought was really cool. DNF, apparently Goichi like won DNF just from using simple inputs. Like he literally won the 50 grand or 100 grand tournament just by using simple inputs. It was just like absolutely crazy to me, because DNF is really similar to Grand Blue, where it's like you have access at all times to both, but if you use simple, there's a slight penalty, although the penalty is like very, very slight, even compared to Grand Blue, right? So it's like, I kind of like that. I really like those implementations. Maybe the penalty should be a little bit harsher. So, you know, you can't win a 100 grand tournament just using simple inputs.
All right, but to be fair, like Goichi's is kind of cracked, and it's not like he couldn't have if he wanted to.
Yeah, I know, but that's what I'm saying. Like Goichi saw the optimal way to win, and the optimal way is to use simple inputs, because there's consistency behind it. But they also come out faster, right? So if you're trying to react to something in neutral, let's say you're trying to like one button DP, that one button DP is going to come out at least like 5 or 6 frames faster than inputting the DP manually, right?
You know who's actually been, this is another person I wouldn't mind getting on the channel at some point, but I'm sure you've seen a lot from Giuna, who's actually a big pioneer or proprietor, or whatever you want to call him.
Proponent,
proponent, that's what I'm looking for, of modern controls. But he's been actually bringing up a lot of interesting discussion, in particular as somebody who lives over in Japan, where it seems like modern is a lot more popular and a lot more common over in Street Fighter 6. And I mean, the way he's talking, he's convincing me like, hey, there's a really good chance that whoever ends up winning that million is a player who's on modern controls. And
I think so, yeah.
And I feel like we haven't seen a whole lot of that yet over here stateside with the online events that we're watching. It seems like, you know, pretty much everyone is still playing classic, but I'm wondering just how much longer it is before more people start experimenting with modern and being open to that idea, and then realizing, hey, like it might actually just be optimal to play this character on modern controls, and like I can win tournaments doing that. So far, I don't think we've seen anyone, maybe even in the top 8, playing modern controls, but I do think that it is going to happen eventually, and it's just a matter of time.
I think so too. And I think the biggest barrier, because I thought about this myself, I'm like, even before the game came out, I realized like I think modern's really strong, and that hasn't changed. The fact that, and I actually think modern in some cases, like for certain characters like Luke, I think modern is stronger than classic, right? I looked into this a lot because I thought like it would give me a competitive advantage, and I've actually really considered switching to modern. And the reason I chose not to switch to modern was because I've been playing classic controls for like 10 years, right? Ever since I started like joining the FGC. And learning modern would be like a completely new role. And I know I could do it, but it would take a really long time. It would kind of reduce my competitive advantage, which is the familiarity I have with
You'd have
classic
to completely
controls,
rewire a muscle memory that you've built up over a decade.
And so I think some people did make that switch, but because you have to do that rewiring, or the people that make the switch aren't as like experienced in fighting games, it's going to take a while. But I think eventually it will happen, because I do think the strengths of modern controls, like one button DP, one button super, etc., they're just too good to ignore.
Right. Just the ability to hit confirm or immediately react to certain things it's incomparable to anything that you can do in classic. And like I believe modern has like a 20% damage reduction or something like that, if I'm not mistaken. But honestly, the trade-off doesn't seem bad at all. There's a player named Arya who made a tweet that says, making motion inputs the focal point on the barriers to entry topic is reductive and misleading. Most beginners can learn how to throw a fireball pretty quickly. It's knowing when and how to apply it that's the tricky part. And I think that's an interesting point of discussion to bring up, whereas like, you could raise the argument that most people can learn how to do a quarter circle and people might struggle. I mean, like the first time I seriously got into like really grinding out a fighting game was Dragon Ball FighterZ. People can say whatever they want about that, but you know, that's 5 years ago at this point. I got half a decade in fighting games. Like I've played fighting games my whole life, but
yeah,
Tekken 7 came out in 2017. I was like, yo, I'm gonna get nice at this. So I was trash, but I was trying. And then when DBFZ came out, I was like, nah, like this is a game I can see myself legitimately like competing in.
Yeah.
And when I first got into DBFZ, I wasn't very good at all at doing quarter circles, but because I enjoyed the game enough, I was like, I'm gonna sit in training mode and I'm gonna do it. And it didn't take long for me to figure out how to do the input. Obviously, it took time and experience and practice to get consistent with it. But I do think that the idea is that almost anyone can learn how to do it. It's learning like how and when to apply it, how to get more consistent with that type of thing. That's the tricky part. And I just kind of want to hear what you think about that, and if that's I
think it's a barrier for sure. I don't think it's the end all be all. And I think what this tweet is getting at, which again, it's Twitter. Things are hard to like interpret. Like, everything comes with like a veil of interpretation because you know it's 160 characters. But in my opinion, stuff like footsies, mind games, fundamentals, etc., are way more important and way more impactful to how well you do at a fighting game than how consistent you get out of motion input, right?
I'll agree with that.
But to that point, if those things are way more important, why do motion inputs matter, right? I don't get why so many people are hung up on motion inputs being like, oh, if you could do motion inputs, you're a real gamer and you're actually skilled. But if you can't do motion inputs, you're a scrub.
I do think that with a lot of people, there is just a slight amount of elitism that people are showing or displaying with it. I don't necessarily think this player is coming off that sense, but I do think there is an emphasis or a focus on it should be easier to teach people how to play the game than it is to, there should be more of a focus on teaching people how to play the game and how to apply certain things as opposed to making the game simpler to play. And like I've had my gripes, my ups and downs with like the simplification of things in video games. I mean, honestly, one of my things in DBFZ has like kind of started my experience is like certain things they're just like, okay, they just want anyone to literally just be able to face roll this game. But there's also a part of me that's kind of like accepting that this is like just the path that modern fighting games are going down, where they want to lower the barrier of entry, make these games more accessible, and then try to retain players in that sense. And then once they get them to try the game, hopefully they stick to it. I do still feel like there could be more of an emphasis on actually teaching players the game, and I'd like to think that these games are getting better at tutorials and training modes and whatnot. Hopefully Tekken 8 releases with a robust training mode and tutorial that's leagues and head and shoulders above Tekken 7's, because 7's wasn't that great.
Yeah, oh, that was a terrible tutorial.
Man.
I spent, when I was learning 7, I learned 7 for like a week, and like the inputs aren't that hard, but it's more of like there's so many moves, there's so many mechanics. I didn't know what
overwhelming,
to do. And like, yeah, I spent like the first day just on YouTube, like trying to look up every single tutorial, try to like.
And you shouldn't have to do that for a game. Like, your default shouldn't be, all right, I guess I got to go to YouTube and look up a tutorial, because when you tell somebody they're gonna have to go on YouTube or go to somebody's Twitch stream to learn how to play this game, that's gonna deter a lot of people off rip. So I understand the idea of like, well, if the game is this easy to do, or if you can immediately jump and push these buttons and do some cool stuff, like, okay, you'll get more interested and engaged, and then they might want to do that of their own accord. It's like, okay, let me look around and see what I can learn. The only thing that I will say is that I do think there is a certain level of satisfaction and like fun to pulling off certain things when it comes to execution. Again, as somebody who doesn't have the best execution, I'm not the greatest example of that. But when I do like a particularly sick combo or like a link that I know is really hard or something like that, I'm like, you feel good about yourself. And that is one of the things that I feel like is rewarding and a lot of fun about fighting games, is pulling off a really sick combo that I know not just anybody's doing or that I practice really hard on that or whatever. But by that same token, I was playing the Rising beta the other day and I picked up Yule for the first time. I went in training mode. I learned a combo in about 30 seconds where it was just like, I did like heavy auto combo, it's a EX lariat in the corner, and then medium auto combo into EX DP, and I was like, that was pretty sick.
Right. I think there's a variety of different opinions in the FGC, and you have, I don't know, I think the people that haven't played fighting games that much don't have like the most well-informed opinions, unfortunately, on the topic. Like, especially when it comes to like modern and classic controls. So like, I don't know if you've seen like any video about, like, if you go in the comment section about any video about modern controls, people that play classic that are stuck at like iron rank or bronze rank as Street Fighter,
you don't have to tell me.
they think modern control players are like the spawn of the devil. Like, they're cheating, they should be queued up differently. They're it's like all of these things that are just, you know, the reason I'm losing is because that person is playing modern controls. Which, you know, if you know anything about fighting fighting games, you know that's completely nonsensical, right? Because there's so many more important things. But I think people kind of like they conflate the two because, you know, it's easier, so therefore I'm losing, right? I actually have a really hot take. If a game has classic and modern controls, I think the modern controls should be unviable at high level. So I think if I were to switch Street Fighter 6, I would keep it good for the beginners, but I would make it something, maybe it's more of a damage reduction, maybe it's you lose more moves, maybe it's something that balances out the game more. So at high level, it's no question that classic controls is the best.
So that's the thing that made it so interesting to me, that they wanted to make it so that, because like I said, I feel like DNF Duel and, you know, Grand Blue already had a better system in place where it's like there is an advantage and a disadvantage to it. And with Street Fighter, I still feel like we have yet to see enough of it to see if it needs to be tweaked some more in terms of like toning modern down so that it is less viable at the highest level. But like, no, I think I agree with you in that sense that it's cool to allow new players to like get into the game and be able to have fun right away and do things with their friends. But if you really, really want to get good at this game, okay, you're gonna have to take it to the next level and develop some sort of execution and whatnot. And I don't think that's a hot take, but some people might. No, I'm with you on that.
So the thing for me is, let's say in 2 years, it turns out modern controls is better than classic controls, right? Now, Capcom, there's two things, right? Capcom could nerf modern controls, which are probably not going to, if they did it, it'd screw over all the people that are playing modern. Or I'd have to switch to classic, but I'm two years behind, right?
Yeah.
You see like how big of a disadvantage that is? To like it's almost like you're kind of like putting your chips on, will modern be better or will classic be better?
Yeah, and I also think
like
it's
speculating, right?
I also think it's got to be really difficult to figure out how exactly do you balance it and like maybe necessarily nerf it more so that's not the most viable option at a high level, but still make it accessible and fun. And like, you know, still encourage newer beginner players to want to use it so that they don't feel like, oh, I'm just never gonna win because I'm playing on modern. It's like, yeah, it's easier, but like I'm just at such a big disadvantage, and I don't have a clue how you do that. But
yeah, the more I think about it, you just like you like make certain moves worse, or you just like the more advanced moves. Like, so for example, beginner players aren't going to do like link combos, right? They're not going to link stand medium punch and the crouch medium punch. So if they make stand medium punch like 2 frames laggier or something, like a beginner player is not going to notice that, but an advanced player will. So it's stuff like that like it's disguised, like it still feels the same for a beginner player, but advanced player would know that this is worse, so to speak.
Actually, now that I think about it, I forgot Guilty Gear had something like that as well with you know, I forget what it's called, but regular mode basically and stylish mode, right?
Yeah.
I never really the first Arc Sys game I played was Rev 2, and I got into Guilty Gear because when DBFZ got announced, I was like, all right, let me see what a fighting game by these dudes is like, because I had never played one, and I'd heard of it before, but I'd never tried it, and I was like, oh, what's the hell is stylish mode? I remember I picked it once by mistake. My character starts doing all this crazy stuff. I'm like, did I just get sick nasty at this game out of nowhere? Like, what's going on? Right. But yeah, do you have any experience at all with stylish mode? Or
I've seen it. I've never tried that, but I've tried stylish in Ultimate Marvel 3. There's also stylish in that. I think the optimal way is like those stylish modes are like so suboptimal, and if I remember correctly, I don't think you could use them online either. Someone might need to correct me on that. I think the optimal is like somewhere in between where modern controls for Street Fighter 6 is, where it's very, very good, almost at an extremely high level, and stylish controls where it's like this is obviously super inferior and you might not be able to use it online, and even for beginner players you don't recommend it because it's going to become obsolete in like an hour, right? So I think like there's an in between there where like if you hit that sweet spot, I think it's really good.
Yeah, I feel you on that. So as I'm sitting here thinking about like what you said and my thoughts and feelings on it, because again, I always relate a lot of things back to Dragon Ball FighterZ because that's the biggest thing on my channel. It's the game I built up my following off of. It's the game I'm most experienced with and the best at. And it might strike a lot of people as a surprise to hear me say that, like, no, I'm fine with the idea of like, for example, auto combos or like modern controls or simple inputs and everything like that.
Auto combos are completely cool, yeah.
Yeah, I agree. For me, I feel like the issue that I have is the strength and viability of them and how much it is encouraged to do that at every level. And that's something that I probably hadn't verbalized or like figured out how to articulate until you said it out loud. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't be encouraged to do the simplest or a lot of times in my experience, the dumbest thing possible and get a crazy amount of reward for it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I do think that is. But I think you said you had another hot take or two that you want to say.
Yeah. So what do you think about? I'll ask you the question. What do you think about Project L and modern controls? Do you think there should be technical inputs in Project L?
So I am perfectly okay with that. So I like I said, I think DNF Duel and Grand Blue kind of had it right, or like even Street Fighter was like there's a modern and there's a technical, but there's like pros and cons to both. But I think that regardless of what the input system is or how the control scheme is, like top players are going to be top players. People who aren't good at fighting games, like they might do a little bit better than before, but they're not suddenly going to win Evo. So if the game is just going to be simplistic in nature when it comes to inputs, that's fine by me. I do like the idea of having two different control systems and, you know, there being pros and cons, and maybe like the simpler one not being the best option at a high level. But honestly, I'm going into it with a pretty open mind, and as someone who hasn't played it, unlike you, I don't have a lot of experience or like, you know, personal opinion on how something like that works. But if the game just launches with only simple inputs, I'm just like, whatever. Because like I said, even in DNF Duel and Grand Blue, I'm playing purely on simple inputs. I'm not even doing technical motions. Even though I could, I'm just getting with the times.
Yeah. So I actually think I'm completely cool with how Project L does it. And I think Project L does it better than Grand Blue currently.
Really?
Because Project L is unabashedly like, you're going to use simple inputs and this is required, and the technical aspect of the game is going to be elsewhere, right? Where Grand Blue, the new change is you can use technical inputs, they're just worthless, which is like, like what's the point? Right?
I guess if I could speak to any reason as to why they allowed it to stay in the game, is that because, like you said, for a lot of people, like that's already in your muscle memory. Like I've been playing fighting games like this for 10, 15, some people's case 20 years. So like it's just more in my brain to do a quarter circle than it is to do forward R1 or something like that, which not the players who've been playing for that long couldn't adapt.
Yeah,
but it's just
I guess
that's the only explanation I could think of as to why they'd even
as a person that has used technical inputs for Grand Blue for the couple of years I played it, I'm already switching. I'm switching completely 100% to simple inputs, because you're literally putting yourself at a disadvantage for doing the technical inputs.
100%.
And I think that's stupid. You either just remove them or you make it so technical inputs are better.
I agree. I'm just trying to put myself in their shoes and think like, is there any possible reason to leave it in at this point? But they might as well just take it out.
Yeah, I think you are right. You are right, Liz. It's like there's probably a small subset where like people are like, I want to do the technical inputs. Like to those people, I guess that makes sense. But
any other final takes or thoughts that you want to get out here before we wrap up?
Those are my hot takes.
bet.
Yeah, well, I revealed all my hot takes. So
I think in short that we're both basically pretty much in favor of the idea of like, it's okay for like these games to have a simpler control scheme, but I would like to see some sort of balance around it in terms of like how beneficial it is to do that, particularly in a game where there is two different control styles. If the game is just like that and there's just one control style and it's very simple to do, then it just is what it is. But when there's two like that, it is, and I guess it's got to be very difficult to figure out how you make that engaging and rewarding for players, but without making it too rewarding. But I'm not opposed to games getting easier. I just, at times, I don't like how significantly they're rewarded for things being super easy compared to you doing the thing that feels like it should be more rewarding. But I don't know. I encourage anybody who is picking up a modern fighting game, and I mean that in a literal sense, like a recently released fighting game, whether it be Grand Blue, Street Fighter 6, DNF Duel, whatever the case may be, use the simple controls. Use if you find it fun, if you find it easier, if that's what gets you engaged or it makes the game more accessible to you, then use it. And especially if you think it's actually going to help you win more, use it. You should. And I know who I am, right? And I know that I can be abrasive. I get salty like anyone else. You might hear me say something from time to time if I lose to somebody, but you gonna have to take those with a grain of salt and understand, like, if a brother take an L, sometimes you're gonna say something you don't really mean. It just be like that when it be like that, especially when it be like that. You know what I'm saying? But yeah, I ain't got no problem with modern controls or simple controls or anything like that. I'm using them myself right now, so this is what it is. But,
I totally agree.
Yeah, but with that, I think that's gonna wrap things up for today. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you again, Diaphone, for coming through,
Thanks
bro.
for
I
having
really
me.
appreciate it. Hit this video with a like if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already so you can stay tuned for all this content that I bring you. With all that being said, that's pretty much all for today. And remember that you can have the two swing the bad. Later.
Peace.